Hello and welcome to From There to Here, the podcast where we get real about what it takes to build a new life far from home. I'm your host, Emma Bellamy, and today my guest is Nooria Mehraby. Nouria is originally from Afghanistan, but in 1987, due to the ongoing conflict that was going on at the time, she was forced to leave her beloved country. She first sought refuge in Pakistan, where she spent several years working as a medical doctor caring for refugees and as a lecturer, before resettling in Australia in 1993. Having walked the path of displacement herself, Nouria brings a deep lived understanding of the trauma, loss, and resilience that shape the refugee experience. But there is more than her personal story. She offers decades of clinical expertise in supporting refugees who have endured trauma. She is a senior clinician and clinical trainer at the Service for the Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture and Trauma Survivors, STARTS. Nouria has also published extensively, lectured at leading universities, and was even named Australian Muslim Professional of the Year in 2015. In short, she is a force to be reckoned with in this space, and I'm honored to have her on the podcast. So yeah, I hope you will enjoy and learn from our conversation. Nooria Mehraby, I'm excited to have you on the podcast as someone who spent 36 years supporting refugees as a clinician, researcher, lecturer, and clinical trainer, but also as a former refugee herself. You combine both a lived experience and clinical expertise in refugee trauma, which not many people do. So it's a real privilege to have you on the show. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you so much, Emma, for providing me and giving me this opportunity to be one of your guests in this show. And I'm really looking forward to share my experiences with you, if it can be any help for others.
I'm sure it will. So let's actually start with your personal story, because it's highly intertwined with what you do professionally. As I said before, you began supporting refugees. You experienced the challenges of being one yourself. So can you take us back to the context that forced you to escape your country?
Sure. When we fled Afghanistan, it was a time that Russians were still in Afghanistan with communist regime backed by the Russian. During that time, they had systemic state terrorism targeting different people, specifically middle and upper educated people, as the enemy of the revolution. So tens and thousands and hundreds of Afghans were imprisoned, tortured. Disappearance was very common on that time. So it was really, really a risk for people who were educated. And as a medical doctors and professionals in being lectured at university, my life and the life of my husband, who's a doctor as well, it was at risk. So we had no choice but fleeing with our two very young children from Afghanistan to save our lives.
And so you actually paid smugglers to escape the country because that was the only way for you to leave. And for many of us, it's very hard to imagine what a smuggling journey looks like. So would you mind describing a little bit what your escape was like for you?
Many refugees don't leave their country with passport and visa in their hands. And it was the case for millions of Afghans who fled Afghanistan. We were also in that category. First of all, I must say that Afghans are very patriotic people, and the decision to leave your country is not an easy decision for an Afghan. Not many Afghans leave their country for a better life, as maybe in case with migrants and other group of people. So it was the case with us. If we hadn't had that fear of being killed and prosecuted, we would have not left Afghanistan. Yes, we paid a smuggler who took all of our belongings and some of our documents and jewelry and everything. So he first took my husband, and then a week later, he took us. Unfortunately, he left my husband in the middle of nowhere and short of food and water and everything. And luckily, with the help of some local people, he was able to escape to Pakistan. And a week later, the smuggler, we traveled with him with my two young children, my mom and myself. So it was a very tough journey, and we had to walk from times to time, use animals, being on a track, and even in I had to wear traditional clothes, so blend in with local people, because usually smuggler, they have a link with the government but also with the opposition group, so that's why they know all this illegal way how to get people out, smuggle people out of the country. So that was the case with this person as well. So it was a very, very prolonged journey and very, very stressful. The smuggler had promised us that he would give whatever he took from us when we reach Pakistan, but he left us in the border and we never saw him. He never came back. So I lost like things that were very precious to me, like my wedding photos, for instance. So things that were gifted from my dad or people that were significant in my life. Small things, but very precious and very sentimental piece of memory. Yeah, so that was our story, which can be similar to other refugees as well. We were not the only one that we had experienced such a terrible and dangerous and prolonged journey. Many thousands and hundreds of other people even gone through worse circumstances than this.
Yeah, but it doesn't remove the difficulty of it, right? Even if it's a common, unfortunately, experience among refugees, it's still incredibly painful to have to restart your life from scratch and be depossessed of your possessions. So, to get into the context of what your life was like in Pakistan, you arrive, you have nothing, and you have to rebuild your life. One thing that is going on for you is that you are able to practice medicine at several refugee camps over there. And in fact, you actually saw 60 to 70 patients per day there, while also teaching medicine at university. So it was a very, I imagine, intense period of your life where you had to work a lot to rebuild your life. And when you reflect back on this period of your life, how does that make you feel?
Yes, was very unique experiences, and obviously at personal level we had to start our life from the scratch and with losing everything. And then in professional level, yeah, I did work in different refugee camps, but I had to travel 2 hours from each side to reach the camp. At the beginning, I was the only female doctor amongst camp's population. We were 5,000 people, but later on they recruited a couple of more doctors. So yeah, I used to see 60 to 70 patients per day under really under-resourced clinic with not having enough resource, just some painkillers, antibiotics, and medication for malaria. And if you're lucky, we would have some vitamins and so on. And then the experience itself is, I would count it as inspiring and rewarding. I was always touched with the enormous capacity of refugees or Afghan refugees, their capacity for survivors, being in those circumstances. As I said, it was overcrowded, like even disease like tuberculosis, like for sadly it was 70% of tuberculosis was detected in women because of overcrowded circumstances, malnutrition, multiple pregnancies, and so on. And then children were dying in front of our eyes because we couldn't simply vaccine them. They were dying because of all those preventable disease that could have been prevented by vaccination. So it was a very tough job. It's reward, but at the same time, it's sad to see people suffering like that and to share the pain of your patients or your clients. And one of the interesting things during nearly 6 years that I worked in refugee camps, I never prescribed any medication for depression or anxiety because people were in a survivor stage, and so trauma wasn't past, it was ongoing. They didn't have time to think about anything else, but they had to survive, like find foods, shelter, even drinkable water and wood and stuff like that. So on that time, even though mental health was addressed with some kind of really basic level by organizations like UNHCR, MSF, or Save the Children, Management Science for Health, where I used to work, and then other AIDS organization, but it wasn't the primary concern. So it was overlooked on that time. And also it was a very low rates of suicide despite that level of trauma. It could be related to Afghan's Islamic belief that suicide is forbidden in Islam, and their strengths in resilience, and again, just kind of not having time to think about anything but to survive.
Wow. Yeah, that must have been quite an awful experience. But yeah, as you say, it's rewarding. So you stayed in Pakistan for 3 years?
No, it's 5.5, so close to
Five and a
6.
half. Yeah, so it's quite a long time. But then at some point, you applied for a refugee visa to resettle in Australia. And so once it got approved, you resettled in Australia in 1993. And you had to rebuild your life again, once more from scratch. So what was the hardest thing about it?
For me, the loss of my homeland, Afghanistan, the Afghanistan that I have it in my picture, not what you see in TV today, the beautiful country, the mountains, the spring, flowers, smells of flowers, taste of fruit is different here. It's not the same. And the freedom, the peace. Afghans themselves as nationality, as ethnic groups, because Afghans are very dignified and pride people. And they have certain cultural things like Afghan generosity, hospitality. I mean, we still keep this with us in Western countries because that's very much embedded in us. But just there are things because of trauma even has an impact on a broader culture on the way it is. What I see in television, it's not what we had in Afghanistan. Like we had educated women, we had universities together, and we had women work as top level jobs like ministerial level, being a senate, being a member of parliament, doctors, engineers, lawyers, judges. I hope you don't mind me saying this. My own sister, at the age of 17, she got a scholarship to go to USA and do her year 12. And my dad, who was a high court judge and an Islamic scholar, he allowed my sister to go, and she stayed for a year in an American family who looked after her because they sponsored her, and she did her year 12. So we didn't have what we have today here, which is really, really heartbreaking. When I look at TV and when I look Afghanistan the way it is today, I say to myself, it's nothing left to lose, basically nothing left to lose. In addition to that, obviously separation from my extended family, and also losing quite a significant number of my extended family due to war or natural death or separation. And it has been really, really difficult. And I believe with family members scattered around the world, life can never be the same as it was before. And losing my extended family is one of my greatest losses, I would say, because we are from collective culture and family becomes a part of your identity. And when you don't have that in the host country, then it's a loss or fragmentation of a part of your identity.
Yeah, so it was grieving what you lost externally, but also internally. I was also grieving a part of yourself, a part of your identity. And so tell me about your transition to mental health, because you could have requalified as a doctor in Australia, but you decided not to. You decided to start new studies to become a refugee-focused clinician. And yeah, what is it that sparked the interest for this new profession?
So obviously, we had to go back to study medicine again or sit for the exams. On that time, I had 3 young children, and we didn't have any extended family here to support us. So my husband and I, we discussed it, we spoke about it, and we made decision together. I choose to wait for a while, and he can go first and study. And then initially, I looked for a job that was close to my heart. So I was looking for somewhere that I can work with refugees. And then I found this job as a bicultural counselor at start. And at the initial stage, I wasn't thinking I'm going to be here for 30 years. But yes, it's just a transformation, which I'm happy about it actually, because I thought I'm going to go back and study medicine after my husband gets his qualification, which he did, but I never went back, and I never left STARS, except like I had second jobs as a lecturers in different universities in New South Wales, but I never left STARS in the last 30 years. So at the beginning, known in the community as a doctor, and I was a bicultural counselor, so I worked mainly with people from my own community. And so people would come to me, and they don't have much concept of counseling, so they were new. It was really hard and challenging for them to see me in a new role. So they used to come and ask me for instance, medical advice or prescription or medication and so on. And I had to explain my role over and over again, which was very disappointing. It was frustrating. There were times that I felt that my hands were tied up, like I could no longer use my hands. I could no longer prescribe medication. So it was quite frustrated. But as time passed and I entered the inner world of the survivors, I learned so much from their strengths and their enormous capacity to survive. And healing the body transformed to healing the soul. And I found my own healing in the healing of others. Yeah, so that's why I stayed and I never left and I never went back to study medicine, because I just found this more fascinating and more interesting.
And I assume that you could connect as well with what they were going through because you had been through it yourself. So there was
Yes,
yeah, the lived experience was there.
it is. Yeah, it is. Although it's not always easy to listen to the horrific experience of the survivors from your own country, but when clients achieve their therapeutic goals and things change, it's an inspiring and rewarding process. Yeah, I wouldn't give that to the world, honestly, but when I see a difference in my clients, it's very inspiring, very unique experiences. And I'm very, very glad and happy that I stayed and maintained what I was doing as STARS.
I can tell. I can tell. So actually, let's discuss about the mental health issues that refugees face in your practice. For the refugees who are listening to us today, so that they know that they are not alone, but also for those who have no idea about what the refugee experience is like and would like to understand the psychological consequences of being a refugee.
Sure. So, unfortunately, refugees are more at risk of mental illness. Statistics shows that there's a 30% high chance of PTSD or post-traumatic stress symptoms, 20 to 40% high chance of depression, 15 to 30% of anxiety, and prolonged grief reaction is 33% higher in refugees in comparison to general population. It doesn't mean because refugees are weak or something is going on. It's because they had experienced really extraordinary traumatic experiences through their lives. So, being a refugee myself, and I've worked so long with refugees, when we could come to a new country, we have our traumatic baggage that is from when things happen in country of origin, when we will back home, on the way when we flee, but also in refugee camps. Life is not getting any easier for refugees. And then when we come to the new country, we have that past traumatic baggage. And then here we're facing lists of other challenges. For instance, like we need to establish our life again from zero. We need to find accommodation, find job, learn a new language, adjust to a new culture, meet a new culture that's a culture in transition. It's constantly challenging and sometimes can be quite frightening and quite anxiety provoking as well. And then some of us that we don't have visa, not having that valid visa is another kind of challenge. And also all normal life challenges that we would experience. So it's a serial of challenges, and then it's our past experiences as well. And then that can we can present with serial of symptoms, like sometimes maybe we have nightmares that's similar to what we had experienced before. Sometimes we get this kind of like rewind movie, all those really scary thoughts or experiences that's coming back. Sometimes we feel sad, we feel like crying, we're grieving from inside. Sometimes we want to totally isolate ourselves and be somewhere. Sometimes we feel worthless and hopeless. Sometimes we avoid certain things. We don't want to see, we don't want to talk, we don't want to touch, we don't want to hear certain stuff. Sometimes we feel so overloaded with the intensity of challenges that we face, and plus our baggage from our past. Sometimes even we may feel that life is not worth it. We may have some thoughts to end up our life. Sometimes we may be so frightened and afraid to even engage in any conversation, maybe afraid of authorities. We see a police on the streets, we are afraid. So these are few examples that I'm giving. So these are our normal reaction with what had happened to us. Luckily, here in Australia, there are systems that can help, including our organization STARS, who we are specialized in assisting refugees. But there are other organizations as well that people can get help. But what's important, it's not that they're going crazy, it's not that they're going mad, it is just the circumstances in their reaction to that, and can be supported and help either with just talking, medication, combination, or a lot of other ways that it is. So it's really important that we seek help if we have any of these symptoms or combination of those symptoms.
And I love what you say about that it's a normal reaction to extraordinary events, right? It's a normal thing to be experiencing. But let's actually talk about START, the company where you provide your services, to understand a little bit what's the approach when you get someone with so many layers of difficulties.
At starts, we move behind the symptoms. It's not we just treat psychological problems. We look as a person as a whole, and also we take into account the social, political, cultural environment where these experiences took place. We looked also because refugee trauma not only affects individual, it affects family, community, their support network. So we look this as a whole. We're providing a holistic approach, which I would summarize it quickly. So we have three framework of service provision as STARS. They're different but complementary. So it's not opposing each other, but kind of supporting each other. So first thing, as it's stated by Aroch and Coelho, refugee experiences a complex interaction between torture, trauma, exile, migration, and resettlement problems. It happens in the broader context of Australian society. It's affected by national and international events, but also it takes place in a normal life cycles. But people also come with their protective factors and with their risk factors. So what does it mean when refugees arrive in a new country? They're facing multiple stressors. And when these stressors are interacting with one another, one area, when it's not working, can have adverse effect on that other area. For instance, if somebody cannot concentrate because of the trauma that they have faced and have impacted on concentration and memory, then this person might not be able to learn English, then cannot find job or go for education. That will affect the normal life cycle. At the same time, we really look also in the environment where refugees are. So basically, as much as the environment is supportive and positive, if we foster a positive recovery environment for refugees, then we get better outcome of treatment. But obviously, anything that happen internationally will destabilize our clients. Unfortunately, specifically in the last few years, we had witnessed with many international crises that has not only affect a specific community that they are directly impacted by that crisis, but also other refugee communities, because it triggers and reminds them of their past experiences. So people also come with their protective factors, and then they have risk factors. So what we do in our approach, enhance their protective factors and reduce their risk factors. But also people reaction or this complex interaction depends on a person's characteristics, like how the brain is regulated, level of trauma, educations, what support they have here in Australia. So multiple factors can have impact. So not everyone is dramatically affected or reacting. So we look at this complex interaction and try to unpack it. And then second, service provision, we look at the impact of trauma on biological, psychological, and social level, which is biopsychosocial interventions, which many trauma rehabilitation centers are using as well, because it's well known, neuroscience says trauma has impact on biological level. It has impact on the structure of our brain, but also on the chemistry of our body. We need to bear in mind when it comes to refugee trauma, people also had experienced direct trauma at biological level with physical injury to the body as well as psychological injury. For instance, they've been tortured, they've been injured, and giving electric shocks, beating up with cables, amputations, disabilities, and so on. So it's physical injury to the body as well as psychological injury. And plus also chronic trauma, chronic level of cortisol level put us at risk of physical problems higher, like cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, cancers, arthritis, and so on. So that's why we look at the level of trauma on these levels, and then we provide our intervention accordingly. So in biological level, then psychological level, obviously we look at presenting problems. It's not only PTSD symptoms. PTSD is a part of the problem, not the whole. Our clients have got far more complex presentation. So they have complex presentation, PTSD symptoms, comorbidity of PTSD like depression, anxiety, but also loss in grief is a very compound and a very defined characteristics of being a refugee. You can't find any refugee without loss. If lucky enough, loss of the homeland is one of the losses that no refugee can escape. And also, like with refugees, their assumption world is scattered, because usually we think that life is predictable and safe, and we plan a future for ourselves, we plan a future for our children, but that assumption world is broken because there's no plan. Refugee life is always uncertain. They don't know what's going to happen in a minute time. And then the third level is social level. Our refugee experiences taught us not to trust anyone. I remember during Russian occupation, they kind of implemented a systemic state terrorism in a way that spy of the government were everywhere. You couldn't trust anyone in the community. Like a brother will be with the government, another one will be with the opposition. I always give this example even in my trainings. I was in first year of uni, 17 years old, when the Russian occupied Afghanistan. We were 300 classmates in class. Every morning when I went, one or two people would disappeared, or a lecturer wouldn't turn up. And we didn't have the courage, we didn't have the bravery to ask where this person was, because as soon as you ask, then you would be targeted. So they would punish a group of people to teach lesson to others, and kind of forced to silent and polarize the community. That's why it's often difficult for refugees to trust others, and specifically those who had experienced direct torture, because the purpose of torture is not to kill the body, to kill the soul, to fragment the person, to kill the identity, dignity, and pride of the person. As research in polyvagus theory and neuroscience says, we really need social connection. So that's why we try to enhance that area and work on that level. So it's on biological, psychological, and social level. The third framework is refugee experiences doesn't take place in a vacuum. Recovery also cannot take place in a vacuum. We will need to work holistically. That's why we work with individual, with family, with broader refugee community and broad Australian society to help community and to help individuals. So that's our holistic approach. Obviously, with each level, we use different interventions. So I can just summarize if you want me, or
Yeah, go for it.
with individual approaches, we are very much client-focused Rogerian approach, and we use stage-oriented approach as was proposed by Pierre Genet in 80s and then later on with Judith Herman, and we used different modalities in different stage, which I mean, it's going to be quite boring if I list all of them. But establishing safety is the first stage of working with trauma survivors, because we need to provide a safe environment, engage with our clients with mutual respect, with a non-judgmental attitude that we are with them, not against them, because all these refugees are targeted and discriminated and humiliated. But we need to provide this space for respect in a specifically and culturally appropriate way, and engage our clients. But also we need to make sure that our clients are safe in the external environment. For instance, the child is not having any issue of child protection. A woman is not in domestic violence, so there's not any immediate risk for somebody. So we need to make sure it's got a shelter to live, or it's got a food. So kind of refer them to different organizations to get support, but also safety for them within their bodies, because all those symptoms that refugees have, for instance, flashbacks, dissociations, or intrusive thoughts, they feel that they've lost control of their body, and sometimes they interpret it as being mad, as being crazy. They're ashamed to talk to other people about it. So at the beginning, we try to teach them to have some by relaxation, grounding techniques, so they can have more control of their body and they feel safe within themselves, and then safe in the therapeutic relationship with us, obviously with mutual respect. We invest quite a lot on developing report and developing appropriate therapeutic relationship with our clients. And then we would go to exposure therapy, which is remembering or revisiting traumatic memories. And then the third will be social connection. But it's easy to say than that. It's not all the time that it's happening in this kind of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, because sometimes in a very first session, a client would just disclose very intense trauma. So maybe on that stage, we try to kind of contain it a bit until we resource the client enough to be able to have control over the symptoms and work with the traumas. And we use different therapeutic modalities in different stages, from neurofeedback and biofeedback advances in neuroscience to CBT, DBT, EMDR, and narrative exposure therapy, art therapy. It depends on the client and circumstances. So I don't want to list all of this, but that's what we do. And also we provide quite a lot of group intervention to enhance social support for refugees and provide culturally appropriate group interventions for them, whether it's self-support groups or it's a specific targeted on a specific symptoms like nightmares or grief and loss, or it's a response to an international crisis, because often we found it useful when there is an international crisis to provide group interventions for our clients, because they can hold together on those circumstances and they're like reacting or grieving for the same reason. So that's quite useful as well.
And to make it concrete, can you give me an example of a case that particularly marked you, someone that you can share with us and explain what the approach was?
So I can give you an example which was published in one of my articles. I think it's Culturally Adopted CBT. This was published and I have permission from the client, so I can talk about it. So I had a female Iraqi client who had lost two sons during attack to Baghdad in 2023. They used to live in Baghdad, but my client, when war broke, my client convinced her husband that they should go to Basra because she felt that Baghdad was the capital and it was more at risk, and her extended family were in Basra. So as soon as they left, maybe not too far from the house, unfortunately, rocket attacked it, and then two of her sons were killed on that, and two survived. So they made it later on to Basra. But at the same time, their family home there was also attacked. So even if they had stayed, maybe none of them would have survived anyway. They went to Jordan, arrived in Australia, and then so allocated to me. And unfortunately, she lost another son in a car accident here in Australia. And it was a very devastating, understandably devastating experience. But at the same time, in addition to obvious grief, Klein thought that she was punished by God because she was still grieving for those two sons that she had lost, and then practicing Muslim, and she had fear of God because she had one surviving son, and she had feared that he would die, would be killed as well. So I kind of provided safety for the client. I provided an environment that she could talk without me being judgmental, but also try to, in a culturally appropriate way, try to restructure her thoughts, but at the same time use some of her Islamic beliefs. For instance, Muslims believe that if unwanted thoughts are waswas, it's called Arabic word is waswasa, which basically it's like unwanted thoughts that comes from Satan. And then so when she had those thoughts, she could stop it because she considered this that it was coming from devil, but also in Islamic belief that life and death, joy and happiness, everything is coming from Allah, because we are born in the time we die. It's predetermined. We have limited control over it. So even exploring on that topic was kind of helping the client to understand the whole context, but also helping in restructuring the client to understand what would have happened if she had stayed there. I mean, literally, she would have not had any of her children and her husband with her, if possibly, because the house was completely smashed. So using that one and kind of trying to name even different part of the brain. Like she named amygdala. I did a drawing to educate her on fight, flight, response, because she was dissociated quite often. So she named different part of the brain the way that she wanted it. For instance, for her, amygdala was like a devil or Satan. So she named the amygdala because the amygdala brings all these unwanted thoughts or sometimes completely disconnect her. But at the same time, we went through the education because one of the things, she was feeling guilty that she couldn't remember what happened to her sons, because just like people retrieve the pieces of the body and she couldn't remember that. So one of the things was explaining this concept of dissociation as a respond in survival response and as a coping mechanism, but at the same time, it was something that was created by Allah to prevent us from intense pain when the time is so hard, but later on comes. So just restructuring the thoughts in a very culturally appropriate way.
Wow, I love that how you used her religious belief to reframe her experience. So it's really a, a creative adaptation of CBT to fit their world, to fit the client's beliefs and values.
Yeah, it is. And instead of like listening to relaxation tape, she would listen to the Quran, but specific verses from the Quran that's from protection, from safeguarding. When her son was leaving home, because she was so anxious for her son to leave home, she would read that verses from the Quran and pray. And that gave her sense of safety and protection, that she left her son in the hands of God to safeguard him and protect him. So I would ask her to say Allah in whole breath. And then when she was exhaling, she would say who, which Allah who means Allah exists or God exists. So that was the practice that I used with her. Yeah.
Wow.
And I published an article out of that.
Yeah, and I read it and it was really, I thought it was really, really interesting. I'm actually gonna share the link in the show notes so that people can read it. So, give me 4 tips or 4 things that clinicians need to do in order to be culturally relevant with the diverse communities of refugees that they see in practice.
First of all, I should say that refugees are the most diverse group of clients. So at SARS, we provide services to 179 different countries, people from 179 different countries, and they collectively speak 177 different languages, believe it or not. And then also a large proportion of SARS employees are also coming from refugee or non-English speaking backgrounds themselves, that they enrich the service with their linguistic and cultural diversity. So collectively, we speak over 65 languages amongst our staff. And most of us are more than bilingual, so we can speak several languages, which is really unique. And as soon as we speak another language, even it introduces two different cultures, in the session. So it's taking into account the principle of cross-cultural approaches is not an exception. It is a norm, and it's in our day-to-day practice. And it's very likely for any helping professional who are working with refugees to encounter this on a daily basis. Overall, we take into account cultural safety and cultural competency. So with cultural safety, we're guided by our clients. And we should provide an environment that is emotionally, spiritually, physically, and psychologically safe for our clients. And our clients are the ones that can identify their needs, and we are guided by that. And also, they are the one that can tell us whether we have met their needs or not. And cultural competency, we need to have a certain knowledge about our clients without generalizing. Specifically, it's really important that, for instance, if you have a client from Afghanistan, so it's really important that a central knowledge of the social political environment that's happening now, but also in the past, because this is all contributes to what clients present. So it's really important, but from a reliable source. But we don't want people to memorize like 179 different crime groups. So just some sort of knowledge that we can use it as a reference. But our clients themselves are the greatest source of information on their own unique culture. So we need to be aware of our own culture, our biases, our prejudice, whether, and also sometimes we have unconscious biases that we are not even aware of it. We need to have a good self-reflection with ourselves, and then also we need to go with a position of not knowing and be prepared to learn with the attitude of curiosity and learning from our clients, because they are the one that can guide us and teach us in a culturally safe way. And then seeing whether what we are using is appropriate and tailors to their worldview. We don't have to follow their worldview. We can learn from them and we can be in their journey and they can follow their own way. We need to be aware of our own cross-cultural counter-transference. For instance, for somebody whose sexual orientation is not accepted in the broader culture of the community, might not be as easy for someone else to come out. Maybe that person feels more safe if that's kept underground. Or, for instance, sometimes we feel that it's a patriotic society. Some clients are coming from collective culture. There's certain expectations and roles in the family, who is the head of the family, but this is something that is within that culture. So if a man is the lead of the family, meaning that man needs to provide safety, security, financial, and woman can focus on education and kind of raising children. But it's up to them, not us, to judge this. So we need to be aware of our own cross-cultural counter-transference as well. So yeah, that is really, really important that we learn from our clients, be sensitive, respectful, and ask for clarification if you're not sure. And in the bottom, we're all human beings, and our humanity is the biggest culture we share.
So I see three main things here. One, the need to educate yourself about the client, but without making assumptions, without imposing labels onto them, requiring some curiosity for them to give you the source of information that you need. Then it's about creating a safe space where they can trust you, a non-judgmental space. And the other one is being aware of your cultural standpoint and being reflexive about how your own bias may affect the way you see them and their presentations.
Yeah, great summary and great point. Yeah, it's really important when we say be aware, but also it's not only aware, but also how this impact my interaction with my clients or my clients' interaction with me, you know? So that's really important, a reflective practice. When I'm in a session and I do something that I would not normally do, I always ask myself, what happened to you, Nouria, rather than what happened to client? Because sometimes it's my own something triggered in me. And also, as we said, it's important to have some knowledge about different cultures, but equally important not to generalize it, because otherwise we are alienating a group of people. We're stereotyping, we're othering them. So, which is not a healthy practice. We shouldn't, you know, but also we need to remember that each culture is divided into subculture in subgroups. In each person is a unique characteristics of different intersection, from identity, from education, sexuality, social connection, interests, lobbies, sports, everything. We all have our own unique, even within our own families. We were four siblings, two brothers and two sisters. My sister and I, we were completely different in day-to-day life, and so are my two brothers. So that's why we are all unique, and that's really important, that we treat each individual as a unique person and try to learn from that client and tailor our practice accordingly to the needs of our client.
Do you have any last example about a way in which you practice that differs from the mainstream approach to a very Western technique, and, you know, like something a bit unconventional that most people would be a bit surprised about?
One of the things is a big number of our clients are not even familiar with the concept of counseling. They don't understand what counseling is, you know. So that's why even introducing this concept is different. You know what I mean? I use clients' strengths. I use things that clients, which I mean, it's in general as well, it can happen. It's not only me. So it's kind of, I always ask my client what helped him to survive, and I focus on that, what helped him to survive. And I use that as a strength. With my Muslim clients, with my clients who are practicing, I use spirituality in their treatment as well. The example that I gave, we try to make it more adjustable for them, for our clients. I can give you another example. Again, this I have permission has been published, this one as well. I had a client who was a pharmacist and he was from Afghanistan, imprisoned during Russian occupation for 5 years. He was severely tortured. His torture included beating up with electric cables and giving electric shocks, mock execution, confinement. Eventually, under Amnesty International, he was released. So when I saw him, created safety for the client, but at the same time, I tried to adjust and use my interventions to tailor to his worldview because that was his strength. For instance, he was giving 25 to 30 electric shock per day, and then he was told, "Where is your Allah to rescue you?" But today he told me, "And how did you survive?" He said, "That Allah that they humiliated me rescued me." So when the client said this, obviously that was a big source of strength for that. And I used that. For instance, to increase in memory and concentration. Muslims believe that God has 99 names. So what I did with him, that because his memory wasn't good, he couldn't concentrate, he started to remember God's name. He started from like 5 and then it increased and increased. And that was like practice, like counting exercise for him to practice and memorize that. And then prayer was helping them. And then I also used that exercise for breathing that I spoke before. Yeah, so different approaches with different people.
I really like this idea to ask someone how they survived and really take that as a tool for assisting their recovery.
Yeah, we're very much strength based because we believe that looking at the intensity of trauma that they had experienced, there's always something that helped them. Maybe somebody were significant in their life, somebody that was very kind of important person and guided them in their life, their religious, a hobby, something else, that they've lost it, disconnected, and we try to connect them back to them.
Yeah, I think it's very meaningful to do that. Nouria, do you have final words of wisdom for the refugees and perhaps some migrants as well who have experienced traumatic events and are struggling with mental health issues?
First of all, as I mentioned before, their reaction is normal reaction to all this abnormal experience that they encounter. So it's really okay not to be okay because sometimes we don't seek help. And also I know issue of trust, issues of stigma associated with mental illness, lack of awareness of services. These are the things that prevents refugees and migrants from accessing mental illness. But it's like if we had a kidney problem, we would go and see our doctor. If we had a heart problem, we see a cardiologist. So it's the same. It's not that they're going mad or crazy, but they need support and it's okay to seek help. And there are organizations. Fortunately, in Australia, we're lucky that we have these services and often they're free of charge, including SARS, and they can seek help to have better control of their life and build their life here in Australia. And we're here for them.
It's a particularly important advice because only 1/5 of refugees actually seek professional help in Australia. So I think we have a lot of work to do into normalizing that it's okay to seek help and it's okay to have those responses to traumatic events. Do you have a book or any other piece of content that you would like to recommend to our audience?
This is a book by Khaled Hassani, Kite Runner. It's a movie in a book, and I would highly recommend that. Then also, there is a serial that was produced by SBS after 11th of September, and it's called Tales from a Suitcase, the Afghan Experiences. I'm featured in one of the episodes. It's not because I'm featured, but I think it's quite good. And it's a book is written after that, as like from that context, and I have a chapter in that book as well. It's the same title, Tales from a Suitcase and Afghan Experiences. And then in terms of movies, No Other Lands, I think it's quite strong documentary. And in terms of professional, I would recommend a book written by Dr. John Adnan. It's called Rewire Your Brain. Dr. John Adnan has written, I think, at least 16 books that I can count so far. And we were fortunate because he did 4 workshops for us. He's highly known and regarded brain-based therapist. And this book is very simple. Everyone can read it. And it talks about seeds for the brain, which is 5. So basically, the first is S, which is enhancing social connection. E is education. The other E is exercise. I mean, education is whatever that we learn or challenge our brain, learning a new language and instruments or anything, and exercise as much as we can in our capacity from 10 minutes walk to whatever we do. D is not like this kind of Weight Watcher diets, but have a good balanced diet. In the other S is sleep. So it's really good even for ourselves to practice what we are preaching, but also we use it with our individual clients, but we use it in groups as well. And then also a book written by Dr. Judith Herman, Trauma and Recovery. I would recommend these ones. Yeah.
Well, you have many references, but I will put all of them on the show notes for people to check them out. So I have 2 last questions to ask. When I say the word refugee, what does it evoke in you? What are the first words that come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it comes to my mind their incredible resilience in stress and their enormous capacity for survivors. But at the same time, it's sad, it's heartbreaking, giving me feeling of injustice, unfairness, and how in a blink of an eye, a life of a person can turn upside down and you become uprooted, and how much trauma, I mean extraordinary trauma, not normal kind of just the small kind of trauma, extraordinary trauma and multiple losses that refugees are facing, but yet they are great survivors. So I feel that refugees are not a burden on Australian society or any other Western countries. They they enrich Australia with their wealth of experiences, their knowledge in, I mean, culture, in linguistic kind of aspects of it. Even though in surface they may look empty-handed, but if we give them an opportunity, they will be a great contributors to Australian society, despite all the adversity that they have gone through.
Yeah, no, it's important to say that they have so much to give to the society they are going into. So my last question, I usually ask a question that revolves around a sense of belonging and identity, but I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I have a clinician in front of me to ask a more specific question. So how does being a refugee impact your identity? And the reason why I ask this question is that I interview a lot of migrants on the show. And so I want to be sensitive to the fact that their experience can be very different. You know, when you have to leave your country and there is no home to return to, and especially when you arrive in a country where the political climate might be hostile to you. And yeah, I feel that it makes it so much more difficult to rebuild a sense of self and belonging in those circumstances. So how can one do that?
I mean, refugee experience has a profound impact on identity. With most of our clients, including myself, their identity ties to their homeland and their extended family, their collective culture, their social status, and education, their family life, and their specific skills and status in the society. So overall, refugees are constantly in cultural transition, in identity transition as well, So in constantly they have to redefine their culture as they transit in different places. For instance, when they're in first country of asylums, when they're coming to the second country of asylums. So it's constantly culture in transition. And sometimes when we are meeting a new culture, it is very challenging and can be anxiety provoking. And so for refugees, it becomes like a fragmented identity. For instance, if there is a midwife, I'm just giving an example, a midwife who was helping delivering baby, for her to be a helping profession, it becomes one of her identity or helping profession. And then kind of everything else, like not having extended family, not having that circle that she used to have, and then everything that kind of interacts in compounds with that identity, it doesn't exist anymore or fragmented. It's no longer here in this new country. So it is an identity crisis. It's an impact on identity. And sometimes somehow, because for people to just kind of blend in quickly, they may integrate very quickly and they want to just kind of completely forget their whatever identity they have because they want to assimilate so quickly, which is not a healthy way to do. And sometimes they, on the other hand, they may be challenging, like it's cultural bereavement. It's challenging to accept some of the changes in the host country. So it's multiple level. It's fascinating. It's a lot. So I'm not sure if we can cover everything, but to make it kind of shorter, it's really important that we help people to maintain and keep things that are really important and compose their identity, to support them in that, to keep their cultural heritage, and even talking about them, getting them to tell me what is so significant in your culture, what are the celebrations that are significant in your culture, and supporting them in even restoring that. Like here, we with our groups, we have all these celebration that happens for Eid and Ramadan or New Year's, Assyrian New Year, Diwali for our Hindu clients, whatever happens. So they have those cultural elements, but also to kind of channel them in something that still give them some role, well, even if it's voluntary. For this client that I give example, instead of being a midwife, which is not possible because she had to study all over again, she could be channeled as a bilingual educator in family planning. Some things to give her some leading, something that she hasn't lost it completely, and their dignity, restore their pride. And also, we should do it in a way that they should be proud of their heritage, not to dismiss this, because this is a part of them, a part of their identity, while trying to integrate into the new society. Link them with people of the new society as well, so they learn the new culture, new environment. But identity is, like I've heard it so much time from my client that they say, I'm not the same person, because their identity evolves towards certain characteristics that doesn't exist anymore. How many doctors, engineers, lawyers are taxi driver in Australia, and how hard would have been for somebody on such a high social status back home to be in that, because that is a part of their identity, not to have that one. So that's challenges, a part of being a refugee.
Yeah. I think it is actually quite interesting to ask ourselves the question of how we might feel about ourselves when all the layers of our identities are, taken away suddenly. When you meet someone, you ask them things about themselves, their work, their position, but it's hard when you don't have any of these labels to define yourself. So how do you actually define yourself when you have none of that?
Yeah, everything is taken, like things that comprises each person's identity, everything is taken. That's why a session, I ask people what were important to this, what is, because sometimes also they have some of them, but they don't see it anymore because the main one, the significant one, I've taken away from them. So I asked them in the session, honestly, our clients are the biggest teacher and the biggest therapists themselves, because we can ask them and learn from them what were things that were important to the person, but what are things that still would that some extent exist. If not, how we can do this to reconnect and rebuild to that sort of identity. Like this client that I spoke about, my Afghan client, because he was such a leading person, like being in helping profession, and then he eventually started teaching in one of the Afghan school. He started to teach religion and their language, which give him this leadership, some voluntary job, something that kind of give them some connection to their past identity and rebuild a new identity, or not completely, but we don't want them to be a new identity. We want an integrative identity. But as you said, like if all of this are taken away from us, what's left?
Yeah, and I think it's a process to rebuild what it means to be yourself. And I really like what you said about not giving up on the past self, on the old identity. It's really about working on integrating this past and present self, or the old and new self.
Yeah, it is integrating it, which is really, really important. Like I've lived 30, I don't know how many, 33 years in Australia. I'm kind of well established refugees. But there are certain aspects of my cultural identity that I never want to give up. Like Afghan hospitalities, the way we treat guests, some of a very unique kind of aspects of our culture. I never want to give up, and I won't, because that's so embedded in me, and so is in other Afghans. When we have group intervention, we ask them at the end of the year to bring a dish to share. They go like there's no tomorrow, like all these big dishes coming on the table, and that feels so good because they are introducing their culture to a broader Western society. This is what we treat people. This is why we feed people, and that's our traditional symbolized things that are unique in this culture.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the positive aspects of migrating to another country, is that you get to reflect on the aspects of your culture that you want to preserve and that you want to make salient parts of your identity, and you can discard the things that don't really align with who you are.
Yeah. And we are so lucky that we are in Australia with such a diverse cultures, whether they're migrants, whether they're refugees. I think we're really, really lucky to have such a diverse and multicultural society that feel to some extent inclusive, which is something that we need to do with refugees, that we need to find a meaningful integration for them that makes them inclusive and makes them welcome, so they're not impacted by a negative.
Yeah, so that can become a protective factor.
Yeah, exactly.
So, for those who would love to get in touch with you and keep up to date with everything that you are doing at Start, where can they find you and contact you?
Oh, all right. So on Facebook, they can find us with www.facebook.com/starts New South Wales. On Instagram, they can find us at www.instagram.com/starts New South Wales. In LinkedIn, www.linkedin.com/company/starts. On a personal level, I work at Starts, and they can always approach me.
Great. Well, Nouria, thank you so much for sharing everything that you shared with me today. I feel that there was a lot to discuss and a lot to cover. And I know that you have written incredible materials for people who want to know more about the work that you do. I really recommend checking out the articles that you've written, because I think that they are very accessible as well, because they're quite short, at least the ones that you sent to me. So I think that people would really gain a lot from reading them. So yeah, really recommend that.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's short because I was a columnist in psychotherapy in Australia, and the focus of the column was interface or differences. So that's why they're one page short. Focus on differences. Yeah.
Which is good for people who lack time like me. So, it's a really good thing. So thank you so much, Nouria, for everything that you shared.
Thank you. My pleasure. I really enjoyed my time with you, and I hope you got what you wanted to. I really appreciate that you've given me this opportunity to be in your podcast, and I'm looking forward to see it.
Yay!
Thank you so much.
Me too.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Nouria. If her story and insights resonated with you, please share this episode with a friend, leave us a review, or add stars in the rating of the show. And don't forget to follow us. It really helps this community grow. In 2 weeks, I will be interviewing Rugare Gomo, who's an immigrant from Zimbabwe who shares how he's reclaimed his identity, his authentic self, as a Black gay man in Australia. His story is really interesting, so stay tuned. I was your host, Emma Bellamy, and I cannot wait to bring you on another journey from there to here.